My name is Jakub Nowosad, and I am one of the co-authors of that book that Tom mentioned a few seconds ago, so Geocomputation with R. However, my talk will be mostly about geocomputation, and almost none will be about R. I will be talking today about software which is not an R package. It's a standalone software called GeoPAT. And I will describe that software, and I will show you some example case studies that we've done with this software. So just to make a little introduction to the topic of pattern-based analysis, we found the niche in the studies of global datasets. So when you study global datasets, especially classified rasters, you think about pixels, or you think about how data looks locally, or how it looks on a local scale, also how it looks on a global scale. And we try to find a way how to look in the middle, how to look at the local scale, and found a way how to connect local scale to the global scale to get maybe better understanding of the process or of the patterns. And we call the whole approach the pattern-based analysis. So this analysis that I will show you in the details in a second is really simple. We don't work on a single pixels, we just work on a group of pixels. And based on group of pixels and how they are arranged spatially, we try to answer a few questions. And four main possibilities when you are working with local landscapes are to search. That means that you have some local landscape and you want to find similar local landscape. To change, to detect a change, so you can see not only pixel by pixel change, but change in actual landscape. You can do a segmentation, probably that's going to be my main focus today, and you can cluster different similar landscape based, again, on their pattern. So for all of those purposes, we created a software. This software is called GeoPAT 2, and this is a standalone command line software written in C, which means basically it's very fast, it scales very well, and it gives you a lot of opportunities to work that from outside of R or Python. You can just go and install that. I will give you a short description how to install that package in a second. So how GeoPAT is organized. So it is organized in 12 modules, while 5 of them are just base modules. They create some internal information. Another 4 modules, those are the most important modules that gives you some answers. And we also got some utility modules as well. And utility modules are really nice because you can extract results and use that results in your own work outside of our software. So the whole concept of pattern-based analysis is built on 3 core ideas that are very, very closely connected. So first idea is an idea of multifel, or as I like to call that, local landscape. So when you got that large data set, we decided to divide this large data set into small blocks. And we call those blocks multifels, because each of this block encapsulates some local pattern. So our idea is related to some degree to object-oriented analysis, but our objects are not buildings or roads. Our objects are homogeneous patterns. And homogeneous pattern could mean that it's just one color. It's just homogeneous pattern. But it could mean that it's a mix of different categories. Like here you've got a yellow and a green, which means croplands and forest. And it also takes into consideration their spatial arrangement. So that's one of the example multifiles. This multifile is a local landscape, I think 16 by 16 pixels. And it's rather simple. It's only 3 land cover categories. So you've got cropland, you've got forest, you've got shrubland. And you can say how much pixels of each category you have there, but you can do few more things. So we, as humans, we can see that. We can see and we can describe that by saying that's the arrangement of this land cover. But it's not that easy for computers. So we thought about that and we decided how we can represent that image that could be understandable to both computers and humans. And we came up with a few representation of our multifiles. So we call those representations signatures. And there are many possible signatures. Probably the easiest signature you can have is this one. It's a composition of land cover categories. So you can say that 40% of this area is a cropland, and 30% is a forest, and the rest is shrubland. That's nice. But there is one little trick. This could also mean that you have agriculture, forest, and shrubland just next to each other with huge blocks. But it will also mean that you can have just each pixel totally randomly distributed with different category. So it tells us a lot about this local landscape, except actual spatial arrangement. So we prefer this representation, this signature. This signature we called co-occurrence histogram, and it has origin in image processing. So this signature tells you which land cover category or data category is adjacent to another one. So for example, you can see that most of agriculture is next to another agriculture classes, but sometimes they are next to forest and shrubland and so on and so on. So this representation, which is very easy to convert that to numerical form and easy to process by computers, can tell you both, can tell you about composition, about actual areas covered, but also about the arrangement. It tells you about how they are arranged locally. So basically, it tells you about the local pattern. And there are also, in our software, we've got those two, but we've got also, I think, 3 or 4 more. So you can take this local pattern, local landscape, and analyze that using landscape metrics and using entropy values and so on and so on. But I will focus only on those 2. And the third main concept, core ideas, is a similarity metric. So we, as humans, we can see that this one is kind of similar to this one, but not very similar to this one. That probably all of you can say. But for computer, we need to have that representation in form of signatures here. And what's nice, computer can calculate how similar those histograms are to each other. So we can see that this histogram and this local landscape is very similar to this local landscape and this histogram. And what is also nice about co-occurrence histogram, It works well if you rotate your image or have a mirror version of your image, it still gives you the same result. So if I ask you, you probably can say that first and the third one are the most similar, but probably you cannot give me actual numerical value. And that's a nice thing with computers, that I can always ask for actual value of similarity or dissimilarity. And another nice thing is that every time I will get the same result, which is probably not the case always with humans. So we've got many similarity metrics, because if you got two histograms, there is more than one possible way to calculate similarities. And if you want to learn more, we've got a manual for our software, and those metrics are described there. Today, I will mostly focus on the Jensen-Shannon divergence. So that's our default option for calculating similarities between patterns. So for this example, we can see that the first and the third, the similarity, the value of Jensen-Shannon divergence, which calculates dissimilarity, is the lowest. So the lowest value means they are similar, and if that value is larger and larger, it means less and less similar. Okay, so that's all about core ideas. In the slides, you also got installation procedures. So for Windows, we created installer, so we can just download, install that, and it should work out of the box. For Linux, you just need one required thing, which is Godel. And probably all of you are using R, so all of you are using SP or SF, so all of you have Godel on your computer already. So you just need to install the source code of GeoPAT and basically compile that, and you've got, and after probably like, I don't know, 10 seconds, you've got actual software. I never tried to install that on Mac, so if somebody wants to learn about that and try that with me, just let me know, and we can try it. And that's probably one of the few slides about R. I also created an R package called RGeoPAT 2, and it has only just a few helper functions that gives you some tools to import output from GeoPAT to R and do your calculation in R. And for today, I will use just 3 sample data sets. So probably the most important is the data set of land cover for Australia. So this is a land cover data set created by European Space Agency of 300 meters. And the data set is for the whole world for each year between 1992 till 2015. But I only subsetted Australia for 2000 and 2015. And for just probably one small example, I'm also using ecoregions for Australia to show you some small concept. Okay, so let's go to 4 main types of analysis you can do in GeoPAT 2. So the first one is a search. So probably everybody of you search stuff on a daily basis, and Google gives you some summary what was the most popular thing that was searched last year. So people want to know how to create solar eclipse glasses and so on. Also in our Geocomputation with R book, we mention a lot of spatial searches. Because with spatial data, you can search by attribute, you can search by position, you can search for for distances, you can search for intersections, and so on and so on. That's nice, but our question was how you can search for patterns, how you can find similar spatial pattern. And that's why we created the first module, the first application, which is search. So search is could be potentially nice for many applications. So for example, you work on some project, you found some strange species, or maybe you found some process that you want to explain, or maybe you have some idea and you want to validate that idea on a different landscape. You can search for a landscape similar of your study area. And to search, you just need to do 3 steps that I'm going to explain in details. So first step, you need to extract pattern from your local landscape. Second of all, you need to extract pattern for your whole area. And third, you need to just finally compare first with the second. So, small example. We are right now in Pelagia forest in Australia. It's a 6 by 6 kilometer site, and it's kind of a simple landscape. Mostly it's forest. Some of them are evergreen forests. Some of that is the deciduous forest, and we've got few patches of shrubland. And maybe we done some studies there, and we want to compare, and we think that our result depends on a land cover, and we want to validate our results. So right now, my thinking is, where can I find similar place to test my hypothesis? So that's the role for GeoPAT. So in the first step, we are using a module called GeoPAT points his. And what this module does, it's basically extract co-occurrence histogram. So it extracts that signature from this local landscape. So what we are doing here, we are just providing the data for the whole Australia. Next, we provide the name of the output. So that will be our new file. We provide a signature. So I provide a signature of a co-occurrence histogram, but I could also do that for a compositional information. And the last few arguments, it's a location of my study area and size of my study area in a cells. So 20 cells multiplied by 300 meters resolution, it's a 6 kilometer area. Second step is using probably one of the base modules, which is GeoPAT GRIS HIS. This module takes the data from the whole Australia and calculates local pattern for each block of cells. So we are dividing this data into blocks of cells, and we are calculating local pattern for each block. So again, very simple code. Input data, land cover for the whole Australia, name of the output file, our signature, which is the same signature that we use in the first step, and the size of our local landscape that we want to have. And the final step is just to compare both. So with GeoPAT search, we just compare our input, which is the output of the step number 2, with the output of the step number 1. And in this example, I'm using the default measure. So similarity measure I'm using here is JSON Shannon divergence. So let's go to the results. So that's the output of this those 3 lines of code. The output is a raster map. The resolution of the raster map is a resolution that you provide before when you build the grid. So it's a resolution of 6 by 6 kilometers. And this map gives you this blue color for the least similar areas. So, and that looks kind of right, because we got a desert here, and our study area was mostly forest. However, we can also find several places with very, very similar local landscape. So we've got those mostly in the eastern part of Australia, but also in the southwest and on Tasmania. And basically, right now, you can just take this map and put that in QGIS or in R and analyze this data. For example, what I've done, I just took the data and extract my local landscape. So that was the local landscape of that Pelagia forest. And I found 6 the most similar local landscapes. So if you look at them, the distribution of land cover categories is a little bit different, but the composition is very, very similar, and the pattern is very similar. What I mean by that is, I mean that most of the dark green part of the forests are arranged in the very, very similar way in all of those images. So in this way, you can decide, this one is the most similar, so I'm going there to test my hypothesis. Or maybe I have more resources and I can go to all of those sites and test my ideas. So that's how the first application of GeoPAT 2 works. That's search. So quick summary, just 3 lines of code. First line, we create a representation for our local landscape. Second step, we create representation for the whole Australia. And the third step, we just compare the first step with the second step. And we are done. We also created a web app, which is available at seal.uc.edu. And this web app is available for the area of US. For example, this is 1,500 meters area in North Wisconsin, so somewhere here. And I was curious to find where I can find the most similar local landscapes. So with the reddish color, you can find those. And this is a web app, so you don't need to download anything. You can just go there. You can just select your local landscape of interest, and after a few seconds, you will get the result for the whole US. All right. The second application is compare, or depending of your ideas, it could be also changes detection. And what's the reasoning here? So I took, those are basically actual 2 local landscapes, but in a different time. So this is a local landscape in time A, this one is time B. And if you look carefully, you can see that we've got only 2 colors here and here, so 2 categories. But in the first one, we've got like a huge yellow areas in the top left. And in the second one, this yellow area is in the bottom right. So those 2 local landscapes, if we compare them using regular pixel-based analysis, we can get this result. So violet means that the landscape changed from yellow to green, and orange means the other way around. So orange represents changes from green to yellow. So if you just compare that pixel by pixel, our idea is that this local landscape changed a lot. More than a half, maybe 60% of this area changed. But if you think about maybe use of this landscape, it's very similar. We've got very similar area of green in the first, in the yellow, and the second. The same with yellow, very similar area of yellow here and here. Also, if you think about spatial distribution, it's also very similar. So we got clumped, very large area of forest with just a few patches, and the same here. Large area of, let's say, forest with just a few patches. So if you just think about processes there or maybe use of this area, it's still the same. But if we just do a pixel-based analysis, our conclusion is it had changed a lot. So our idea is that pixel-based analysis is good for many, many applications, but not for all of them. And we try to fill that hole and try to gives you a tool to do that. And this is probably the simplest module. So you are just doing two steps. Creating representation for the first time slice and for the second time slice, and you are comparing both. So again, we are using the same function as in the previous example, which is GeoPAT grid his. But this time we are using, firstly, we are using data from 2000, so land cover of Australia for 2000, and in the second example we are using for 2015. And I'm using, my local landscape is 50 by 50 pixels. So in this example is 15 by 15 kilometers. And the second step, we are just comparing the 2000 pattern in 2000 with pattern in 2015. And we are producing, again, GeoTIFF file. So that's the result. So what we've got here right now, we again the result is again a map of similarity. But if you think about changes on a larger scale, in 15 years, it's not going to be a huge change for the whole continent. So most of the area, like water, it's still a water. Most of the desert is still the same. But some of the places change a lot, like here or here or here. So maybe their function changed. Maybe it was caused by human activity. Maybe it was caused by forest fire. Maybe it was caused by something else. Maybe it was caused by a climate change. And this way we can analyze places with changes, and you can find the place with the largest changes, and you can discuss like why this change occurred, or what does it mean? What's the process here? So just to show you a few examples, I just select few local landscape of different similarity values. So the first one, there's like almost the whole area changed. So similarity between those two local landscapes is kind of low because most of this area changed. With the second one, it's less of change, and so on and so on. This one got a similarity of 0.98, which basically means that only just a few pixels had changed. And finally, the last example is between 2000 and 2015, this local landscape is still the same. So again, quick summary. 2 lines of code to calculate patterns for the whole Australia, and 1 line of code to compare. And we applied that technique a few times already. So this is a figure from this paper about global mapping of changes in landscapes. And this is like a very small example from Africa, when we show some changes that were larger and changes that were very, very minor. And in this figure, you can see by the violet color that areas that change in the local landscape. We also apply that for data on US. So you can find those papers, you can read more about that there. And we also created, based on this module and based on this idea, we created landscape changes on a global scale. And this is like very, very compressed information in one map, when you can see global changes, and you can see many, many interesting things, like obvious things like forest decrease and like huge urbanization that was mentioned yesterday. But you can also get more and more information about, for example, moving the forest category in the northern hemisphere even farther north. Okay, so that's an example how you can do spatial pattern comparison, and how you can use this use the output for some analysis. The most complex and the module that we focused probably the most is the module for segmentation. So what does it mean? I'm not going to give you a huge explanation without any images, so just look at the image at the bottom. So on the left, you got land cover dataset, and we are interested in finding homogeneous local landscapes. So we are looking for areas which has similar local pattern. So some of them are mostly forest, but some of them are mixed of 2, or even probably more categories. But we are interested in homogeneity of a local landscape. So sometimes you've got areas which are homogeneous when there is 1 category, and sometimes you've got a homogeneity when there is like 5 categories. Because we think about both compositional and configuration of categories. And in landscape ecology, one of the ideas is that land cover and many other data sets or observation depends on processes. And with stable land cover, you can describe basically processes just using patterns. So, and also, on the other hand, patterns can influence on other processes. So I think there is still a lot of things to explore in this type of analysis. However, there is one extreme obstacle, which is very unusual probably. With patterns, we got to one point, and this is a very, very important point, that there is no ground truth about patterns. I can give you right now a map, like land cover map, and give you a pen, and each of you will draw patterns in a different way. Last year, I've done this experiment on myself, so I took a map, I took a pen, draw lines of similar patterns, and repeat that example next day. And it was a failure. The 2 delineations that I made were maybe not very extremely different, but they were very different. Because one day I started from bottom left, next day I started from top right. First day I drank coffee before, next day I was maybe tired. And it also the same when we think about collaboration. Think about global map, and some part of the group delineates Africa and other part delineates Asia. There will be huge inconsistencies, and there will be it will highly depends on given person and their interests and so on and so on. So our idea is that we need to have a way how to delineate patterns with some level of consistency. So, and the second thing that we like to do is that if I give you a map of the whole world with high resolution, it takes a lot of time to delineate. But if you use this software, it's a matter of minutes. All right, so let's go again to the example. We are still in Australia. We are still with land cover data. And the segmentation process is basically only 2 steps. There's also a third step, but the third step is very optional. But those steps, especially the second step, is complex. So the first step is the step you know already very, very well. So the first step, we just extract pattern from the area of Australia. So we just select our data set, we decide on the size of a local landscape, and extract local pattern for the whole Australia. So that's nice. In this example, I'm using 25 by 25 pixels. And there will be small changes in the next slide. But I will get to that in a second. But the second step is the most complex step in the whole software that we created. It's a segmentation process. And as I mentioned 2 slides ago, there is no ground truth with segmentation. And what does it mean? That basically we provide a few parameters that you can apply, and because of those parameters, you can get different results. They are not very, very different, but the scale of pattern change or the homogeneity of pattern change. So I will just explain a few parameters. So this is the very, very default example. So input, that's the output from the first step. Name of the output file in a GeoTIFF. Name of the output file in a GeoPackage. Our measure, and we can use as many cores as we want. So in this example, I'm using, I've used my laptop, so I just set that to 3. Okay, but you can also use some other parameters. And probably the most important parameter is this one, L threshold. L threshold means how much homogeneity you are interested in. So when this value is very, very low, you will get very small segments, and of course you will get a large number of segments. And when this value is high, you allow to create less homogeneous, but in the same time larger segments. And that's the output in a form of just a vector map. So we've got some segments like here, which are kind of huge, and we've got like a tons of very, very, very small segments. Again, I just use default values. In this example, I didn't change any other parameter like lower threshold, for example. So just go to this area in the red rectangle, and that's the output. So we've got this huge area, which is mostly desert. We've got some areas which are also like only one category. But very often we got areas when one category is dominating, but there is also a second category, or maybe 3 categories, and so on and so on. So as you can see here, the output depends also on the size of the local landscape. Because if you decide to have smaller local landscape, you will have probably better consistency in space. And there is one important thing you need to know. If you look here, you can see that this rectangle and this one, they are not, they're touching, but they are not exactly in the same position. Because there is one of the main ideas with the segmentation is that we create this at the first step. So this is our 7.5 kilometers by 7.5. And this is nice for some analysis because we can do, this is my neighbor, with four neighborhoods. With 8 neighborhoods, we can say this is our neighbor, this is our neighbor, this is our neighbor. But this neighbor is only neighbor by point. And one of the creators of GeoPAT, Jarek Jasiewicz, he found a way how to solve this problem. So basically, what GeoPAT is doing, it's merging 4 multifiles together to create this representation. We call that a brick topology, because it looks like some kind of bricks. And this way, you can see that there is always a line neighborhood, not only a point neighborhood. And this approach improves results a lot. So how the whole segmentation works? It's complex, so if you want to learn more, there is a paper about that. And it describes all of the steps and gives you a few examples. However, probably my favorite step and the most important step is how the segments are how the growing process of segmentation works. So basically, we start from this segment, we look at the pattern there, and we compare pattern here with this neighbor, this neighbor, this neighbor, this neighbor, and this neighbor. So we got 6 neighbors, we calculate similarity to all of them, and we found that this one is the most similar. Okay, so what we are doing next? We are merging them together, and we are looking again for the most similar local landscape. And we are merging and merging until we get to that parameter, until we get to that threshold when we say, nope, that's enough. You shouldn't go any further because you will get inhomogeneous regions. Okay, so I mentioned that there is no ground truth, but still you can calculate some statistics, quality statistics on the data. And we've got a module called GeoPAT seg quality. So this module calculates summary maps of our results. So the first map it calculates is inhomogeneity. And this is the most important property of a pattern-based segmentation. Because we want to have homogeneous regions. That's our goal. So we are looking for having this value as low as possible. The second property is isolation. And this property is less important. Because with this property, we are trying to see that we have homogeneous region here, but the next region should be different, should be visibly different. So higher the value of isolation, it means the next region is different from our region. But this property is less important than homogeneous because with like very, very low homogeneity, maybe you have too many segments, but all of them are homogeneous. But with very, very large isolation, you will have just few very strange segments. And using both of those rasters, you can calculate quality map of the segmentation. So you can see that some areas Some areas with yellow or light green are the segments are of better quality, and some are not this good. And this could help you to go back and maybe change the parameters of your segmentation and maybe make some other decisions. So just to give you some example how you can control segmentation, I've done 5 examples. So the first example is the example I showed you before, default values. Second example, in the second example, I increased lower threshold. What does it mean? My segments are going to be larger, basically. In the third example, I only changed this parameter, mean area. This means that I don't like to have very, very small segments. When you have small segment, find the neighbor which is the most similar and merge them. With the fourth example, I changed the similarity measure. So instead of using Jensen's random divergence, I'm using Jakub. And the last one is an example of using 4 neighborhoods. So instead of this brick topology, using the traditional 4 connectivity. And those are the results. So this is the first one, default values that I showed you before. Second one, I changed threshold, and in my opinion, it looks better than the first one. So we've got like a large areas of homogeneous, and they are way, way easier to see and decide if they are good or bad. With the third one, I just merged the smallest area with the most similar. Here I changed the similarity measure, so you can compare those two. They are a little bit different, but still they are very, very, very similar. And the last one is using just 4 connectivity. And probably you can see the difference. 4 connectivity is not as good as brick topology for the segmentation purposes. So again, quick summary. 3 lines of code, creating a representation for the whole Australia, creating our segments that can be, which parameters can be changed, and finally, calculating some summary statistics, calculating some maps of quality of our results. So, as I told you before, segmentation is probably our main focus. So we published a few papers about that. So if you're interested in the segmentation process or our algorithm, or you're interested maybe in application of this, you can go to some of the resources on this list. Okay, and the last one, the last application that I'm going to describe in details is a clustering. And probably you can ask a question like, what's the difference between segmentation and clustering? I can always just take local landscape and cluster them. The difference is in space, because if you cluster, you can have just salt and pepper representation. You can have just 1 pixel by 1 pixel represented by different categories. But we are interested in representation that are more human. We love to have regions. We don't like to have 12 categories in a small region. We want to have 1 category that represents this area. We want to have some understanding of this area, not the salt and pepper representation. However, clustering could be also important to some cases, because segmentation, another difference. Segmentation is a local process. So segmentation only looks around each other for the most similar local landscape. But cluster is a global process. So you can have a cluster in Australia, which is very, very similar to cluster in South America, or maybe in Europe, or maybe somewhere else. So different techniques, different purposes, different results. All right, so with clustering, GeoPAT only provides you half of the tools. We decided that we are not going to provide you all of the clustering methods possible, Because that's why we've got R or Python or whatever else. So you don't need to, we decided like, for sure it's a better idea to just provide a dissimilarity or distance metrics rather than to provide you all of the things. So with GeoPAT, you can just use output of those 3 modules. So you can cluster not only multicells, but you can also cluster polygons, and you can also cluster points. And in GeoPAT manual, I give some examples of clustering using points and polygons, but today I'm only going to focus on clustering multicells, so clustering local landscapes. And it's on the GeoPAT side, it's very, very easy, and probably on our side, it's even easier for you. So on GeoPAT side, there are 3 steps. First step, representation of Australia, like always. So we deciding on the size, we are deciding on the input data, we're deciding on the signature. In the previous slides, I used that co-occurrence matrix, but for the simplicity of this example, I'm using just composition. So how much of area each category occupy. And after that, I convert that to text and calculate distance matrix. So this distance matrix is basically an array with rows and columns, and each intersection is a calculation between each multicell for the Australia. So you can calculate how similar or dissimilar each multicell is to all of the rest. So the output here is just a CSV file with dissimilarity metrics, and you can use that for your own purposes using the different software. And of course, I love R, so that's why I created our GeoPAT 2 package. And there is one helper function called GeoPAT read dist matrix. You can just read this CSV file. You got distance matrix, and next you can do whatever you like with it. So you can use hierarchical clustering, you can use PAM, so k-medoid methods. You can use every clustering method that depends on a dissimilarity matrix. So how it works? Few steps, just a few steps. In this example, I'm using hierarchical clustering. I'm plotting that. You will see the plot in a second. Based on the plot, I'm deciding on 12 clusters. I extract the ID of my multicells. I create a vector grid so that's representation of my multicells, and I add this ID to my vector data. So just see the results. So I read that CSV file into R, use hierarchical clustering, and have these 12 clusters. So as you can see, some clusters are larger, some are smaller, some are more or less similar to each other. And in the second step, I just move those IDs to my spatial representation. And that's the result. So what we can see here, of course, the easiest thing is just to overlay that on the actual land-cover map to see the results, but I can explain some of that to you. So of course, this nice green color is a cluster number 1. So that's basically here. And this cluster is just one category of water. Cluster number 3 is a shrubland. So here we've got just one category, or mostly one category of shrubland. Cluster number 7, here, sparse vegetation. And cluster number 6 is a mosaic, so we've got like a mix of 2 categories of grassland and sparse vegetation. It's here. And for example, cluster number 8 is shrubland and sparse vegetation, which is here. and so on and so on. So we can next extract how much different land cover categories there are in each cluster. So on the GeoPAT side, 3 lines of code: extract patterns, convert the data, calculate distance matrix. And on the R side, also just a few steps: read the data, calculate clustering, decide on the number of clusters, create a spatial representation using GeoPAT create grid, and finally just plot the results. Okay, so those are the base function of GeoPAT 2. However, we really enjoy to think about stuff and how we can extend our ideas even further. So GeoPAT 2 is not only that. GeoPAT 2 is not very complex software because it's only 12 simple modules, but all of those modules are interconnected. So you've seen probably this module, GeoPAT Grid His, in every example. So this module is a base for search, clustering, change detection, and segmentation, and so on and so on. So you can mix those modules to get the results you want, to get the answer for your questions. And that's why we created this software in the way that it not only gives you a map, but it can also gives you, for example, text files. So this text file is a similarity matrix that you saw in the previous example. So similarity matrix is just a value of similarity between objects. But for example, this one is also a text file. But this represents, for example, composition of land cover. And I will just show you a very small example in a second. So to extract pattern for a numerical form, you can do that based on grid. So that's very simple representation. So we just extract information about each local pattern. You can use points. So you have a point and you have some buffer and you want to extract land cover composition there. Or maybe you want to extract co-occurrence histogram. Or maybe you want to extract landscape metrics for that area. And the third one, you have some polygon. And for your polygon, you want to learn what's the composition of land cover in your polygon, or what's the spatial pattern in your polygon. So you can just calculate that using GeoPAT polygon, and your result will be just a simple CSV file. So I calculated this for the polygons. So I've got several polygons, and those polygons represented ecoregions. And my idea was that in each ecoregion, we should have similar land cover composition. So I calculated that, and I'm only showing you 2 lines. Of course, it was few more. And that's how the output of the text output of the GeoPAT 2 looks like. So you can read that into R using GeoPAT read text. And the output is just columns. And columns in this example represent just land cover categories. And the last column in this example is cat, so category of your polygon. So 0, that was category for the ocean, for the water, and 10,072 was category for Gibson Desert in the middle of Australia. And you can see that This column represents water, and our category 0 is water, so that's nice. But for Gibson Desert, we can describe it by two most important land cover categories. The number X15 is a grassland, and the next one is sparse vegetation. So about 54% of the Gibson forest is occupied by grassland, and almost all of the rest is occupied by sparse vegetation. Today I'm only talking about spatial pattern-based analysis. So that's the probably half of the possibilities you can do with GeoPAT. But I will show you just a few slides of another branch that is in development, and it's still very, very, very experimental, but gives you some results. And those results look really promising. So if you are interested in this part, you can take a look at the GeoPAT manual. In the GeoPAT manual, I think I gave a few more examples of this kind of approach. So in this approach, it differs from pattern-based spatial analysis. In this approach, we are interested in changes in time. So we are starting from January, February, and so on to December. So we got a time series. And this time series, in this example, is very simple. It's only precipitation. But you can also think about many time series at the same time. In some of our test cases, we used precipitation and temperature in the same time. And what we can do here, for each pixel, we can calculate the value of precipitation or value of temperature or any other value that you can think of. And next, you can compare those temporal representations for each pixel. So this way, you get some kind of a signature, not a pattern-based signature in sense of space, but pattern-based representation in terms of time. So again, this is data of British Isles from WorldClim dataset. And you can see that some areas have more precipitation, some have less. And you can ask and answer very, very, very similar questions to those that I showed you before. So this data set is just 240 by 319 pixels, and each pixel is only 12 values. But as I told you before, you can have more values or maybe more dimension of values as well. And for example, my question was, I'm interested in finding similar areas in terms of precipitation patterns. And again, the question is very, very similar to the question on the spatial pattern question. So there, I was interested in homogeneous in spatial pattern, while here, I'm interested in homogeneous in temporal pattern of precipitation. So what we see here, we can see that Eastern British Isle is like huge segment with very, very similar precipitation. But sometimes we've got very, very small areas which differs from their neighbors. And of course, based on this, you can find what's the actual, how the actual temporal changes look in those regions. Why this region is different from this region. And that could also influence other processes. That could also influence some environmental things, but it could also influence people's life. So that's one of the applications. Another one is a clustering. And again, you can cluster all of the pixels. You can cluster based on polygon, but you can also cluster based on points. So what I've done here, I found a database of 97 largest cities in the British Isles. And I've made a hierarchical clustering and divide those cities into 4 groups of similar precipitation patterns. And you can see that with clustering, which is a global method, we can find similar precipitation pattern here, 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 and here. So for example, if you live here and you hate the precipitation, just go here. But first of all, just check what's the precipitation here. But definitely, I recommend don't go there. Because just go back, don't go there. All right, so those are just 2 very, very simple examples. But all of the examples I showed you today are based on open data, so you can just download the data and prepare that data and do your own analysis of that, and use those results to answer some questions and maybe improve them. Okay, so probably that's more or less all I've got to show you today. Just to sum up, in our work we found several areas that this type of methods can be used, and we applied some of the methods to some of the problems. But I think there is still tons of questions that could be asked during using this method. Because in our work, we mostly applied this method on a global scale to show the proof of concept or to show some global properties. For example, this is a figure from our paper where we divide the whole world into homogeneous regions of the similar pattern. And we found out that basically you can group those patterns into several categories based on the aggregation and complexity of pattern. So here we've got something very aggregated and less aggregated and the least aggregated, and here we have something simple and we are going to something complex. And of course this could influence a lot of ecological processes. So just think about what's your question and if that question can be answered in this kind of approach. And just to conclude, in this approach, we don't work mostly on single pixels. We work on block of pixels because we are interested in a local landscape. So we are interested in a local representation and how this local data can be connected with the larger scale data. How it can be connected with data of the whole continents or the whole world. And in this approach, we transform data from single pixel with one value to group of pixels with patterns. And 4 types of analysis, main 4 types are searching, detecting changes, segmentation, and clustering. And we've got a software for that. This software is, of course, open source. The whole code is on GitHub, but the installation, I think, Windows installer is on our website. So it's seal.uc.edu, which stands from Space Informatic Labs. What's nice also is that our software does not require any supercomputer or cloud computing. It can if you want to have analysis of a 30 meter for the whole world, but if you have 300 resolution data from Australia, the segmentation I showed you took probably 3 minutes on my laptop. So that's nice that you don't need to have these resources and you can still get a lot of results that you want to have. Also, we got in our code, we got small subset of modules for temporal analysis. They are very experimental, so if you found any problem, just open a new GitHub issue or email me. We will try to solve them, but they are very immature yet, but that's also the thing that we are really interested in. Because that's a second branch of the things you can do and probably answer different questions and find new answers. So just to repeat myself, I love and enjoy when people prove me that I'm wrong or I've done something bad or something like that. So just when you find any issue, just email me or open a GitHub issue or just say it right now to me. And also, if you have any ideas, how our software can be improved, what's missing, maybe there is a better way to calculate something, maybe there is a method that we should implement, just let me know. I'm very open to any discussion. This presentation, almost all of it, was based on a blog post series that I published on my website in the last few months. So the whole presentation is also available. I will tell that in a second. So you can just go and look at the presentation, and you will get at the blog post, and you will get the description of each step, and you can just get the maybe more grasp of the whole concept I'm describing. For the last time, I'm also showing you official manual for the GeoPAT. Official manual, it has example cases, it has installation, instructions, description of modules. So it could be very, very helpful to just get started with this software. And we also got some older papers which describe our approach and our ideas. So to find more, go to Space Informatics Lab's webpage or go to my personal webpage. All of the slides are on my GitHub account. So you can just go to github/Nowosad/geostat18, and the whole presentation is there. If you have any questions, any ideas, mail me or just find me on Twitter. And if you have any questions right now or during the summer school, I really like to talk about GeoPAT. I like to talk about geocomputation with R, and probably a few other topics unrelated to spatial analysis. So thank you very much for listening to the talk about GeoPAT, and feel free to ask me any questions. Yeah.
Thank you for a good presentation. About the similarity search, you use one point in showcase and showed us you can create a nice quantitative map of similarity for the whole Australia. Can you use it for multiple points?
Yeah. When you use, so with the search, in this example, I just decided that I'm going to give you the simplest example possible. So I just have this local landscape and search for the most similar. But you can, in the same time, the search algorithm accepts either coordinates on a text file with coordinates. So you can provide, I don't know, 100 points, but at the result you will get 100 maps of similarity. Because for each point there will be another separate map of similarity. Any other question?
Yeah, thank you for your talk. Very impressive, I think. I have one question, or a bunch of questions, but one question, is it also working with continuous data? Or you need to have categorical data, because you showed us classified data as far as I got it.
So for the first part of the talk, I focused on categorical data. So all of those methods like clustering and search and segmentation is only for categorical data. So we are not working on the categorical data for spatial pattern purposes, because we think that there are already some work being done in this field. However, in a sense, the second part, that spatial temporal, it's more about actual values. So it's more about how to get a numerical value. Because if you think about precipitation, each pixel has a 12 values. So you can also segment based on numerical, but our main idea here is about temporal. But you can also think about that as a vector of numerical values as well.
So I'm interested in dealing with problems that arise when you start to get finer and finer grain data, like LiDAR data or finer resolution satellite imagery, and you start to lose the context of the values, because you basically have a value at a point and the neighborhood is so small that you don't know anything about the larger neighborhood. So I'm wondering whether you tried using your motifs at multiple scales. We were working with digital elevation data and creating these Gaussian pyramids, going out and trying to match the scale of the predictor variables to the scale of the process that's affecting the value at a point.
So I've got two separate answers to this question. And just give you some base concept. One of the signature we provide here is a signature we call decomposition.
Yes.
And this signature, it basically just goes from like 4x4 blocks, upper and upper and upper and upper and upper. So we got like a vector of different scales, and it works really well, but it's harder to describe that comparing to co-occurrence histogram. So it works really well for some purposes. But also what we found, for that project, when we created a segmentation on a global scale, we got comments from reviewers, and their comments were, you just used one data set. You need to compare that to other data sets. So what I've done, I used data set for Europe with different provider, the same resolution, and I use data set for the whole globe with lower resolution and different provider as well. And what I found out that similarity between the output is astonishing. So basically, land cover data, at least land cover data, even on different scales, could be represented by the same patterns. Because basically, you've got a process that creates this pattern, and this pattern doesn't depend if you use this data set in this resolution, this resolution, this resolution. Of course, in details, maybe it is, but not on a global scale.
No, that's exactly the thing that I was thinking about, was your spectral. And so you're basically turning classes into a sequence of numbers or a spectral signature. You can have spectral signatures at multiple scales or multiple motifs.
Yeah.
And then in the context of global mapping, you get a data explosion, mind you, but for every grid cell, you have a series of spectra at increasing scales. And then in our context, we predict soil properties and soil classes globally. You use them as covariates in predicting the properties. And the spectral signatures that influence prediction the most are liable to be at coarser scales rather than at the finer scales.
Yeah.
And so you can use it as a covariate for predicting soil properties as well as a categorical classifier.
Yeah, of course. You can extract values of co-occurrence histogram or composition histogram and use that, for example, in machine learning or in clustering, as I showed, or in different techniques as well. All right, so I think that's all from me right now. So just one reminder, there is a book cover competition We offer $150 for ideas, codes, images, whatever you provide about your ideas how the cover of our book should look like. So just think about that, send us an email, or just post that on a Google Plus page. We are really looking forward to your submission. And thanks again for your interest in GeoPAT 2. And I look forward to any question during the next coffee break.